Thank you so much, Lori. And hello, everyone. I'm very excited to be here with you today. Um, so thank you for that introduction. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Hello again, everyone. My name is Julieth Diaz Benitez, as Lori said at the beginning. I'm an educational psychologist. I'm also an educator, and currently I work as an instructional designer at College of San Mateo, and I have been in this role for the past 5 years. Time flies. Um, but just to also give you like an overview of why I am here in this session, I'm facilitating this session today. So as I said, I've been at CSM working as an instructional designer for the past 5 years. And before that, I did instructional design work in Florida at the Florida State University and also at the Tallahassee Community College, now Tallahassee State College. Today, we're going to talk about what is it that it entails, what is it that a career in instructional design entails, what are some of the considerations around it, um, and hopefully we can engage in some rich conversation about it. Before we jump into the meat of the session, I just wanted to clarify that, as you probably know, instructional design is a very broad and comprehensive and expansive field. And there are so many areas within instructional design that you could focus on or advance on. And so the session today, I'm going to be speaking from my higher education lens in terms of instructional design. And a lot of what you're going to be hearing today during the session is going to come from my experience in the role. I have tried to put together a presentation that also gives you like an overview of what the landscape of instructional design can be, but just know, I want to make that clarification from the get-go that my experience is going to be, that the session is going to be permeated by my experience in the role ultimately. Okay. Let's advance. So I want you to begin thinking about this prompt over here, and you don't need to type it in the Q&A section, just if you have a piece of paper or perhaps you just want to think about it for 1 minute. When you think of an instructional designer, what are some words that come to mind for you? You can just think about it or write it down. And we're going to be revisiting this as we go through the presentation. I would like for you to keep this in mind, keep your answers in mind to see how your understanding of this role and this area, this field can expand or get more complex as we go through the session today. Our agenda for our time together, I'm going to start by talking a little bit about what is the landscape of instructional design, what does the work entail, what does an instructional designer do, where do we do that work, what are some of the key competencies, knowledge, and skills that are required to work as an ID. Then I'm going to zoom in into the instructional design approach in higher education. I'm going to include some examples of my own work at that point, and then I'm going to talk about some of the educational or academic pathways that can lead you in your transition if you are looking to change careers or if you are just at the beginning starting to consider a potential career in instructional design. And then at the end, as Lori said, we'll have some time for questions. Okay, let's start here. Why am I calling instructional design a landscape? Well, as I was saying at the beginning, there are many different directions in which you can go if you decide to pursue a career in instructional design. But ultimately, what I think unites us all is that an instructional designer is someone who designs, develops, and assesses learning experiences that are responsive to a variety of needs. So, not only the needs of the learners, but also the needs of the facilitators, the needs of the discipline or the field where you are doing the work, and the needs of society at large. And so, there are three elements that I would like for us to be grounded in when we think about what is instructional design as a field. And so, first of all, we bring a very broad or comprehensive understanding of learning. And what I mean by that is that learning doesn't only happen within the constraints of a classroom or within universities or schools or corporations. Learning really happens everywhere in the conversation that you have in the morning with your family member, when you are commuting and you're listening to a podcast, perhaps as you're driving, the conversations that you have at work, when you go to get your coffee and you have that really rich interaction with a colleague. So, as IDs, we bring this expansive understanding of learning in everything that it can be and in all the places where it can happen. A second element is systems thinking. And what I mean by this is that we not only think about the individual who is participating in a particular training or a class or a learning experience. We think about the systems that surround that individual and the systems in which the learning experiences are happening ultimately, because it's all connected. So, this is going to be a key element throughout our conversation, and you will see this thread showing up again and again. And then finally, a third element is an interdisciplinary approach. Meaningful learning doesn't really ever happen in isolation, and that is a key component of the instructional design profession. We collaborate with subject matter experts, but also with administrators, with different roles in an institution, wherever you are in whichever context you are working as an ID, there's always going to be that collaborative and cooperation element that needs to be at the center of the work. So, what is the work? What does an instructional designer do? Um, and as I was saying at the beginning of the presentation, it's really going to depend on where you are working as an IT, what is the type of work that you're doing, and what is your focus, right? But I think a common element throughout is that we are really thought partners in the process of designing better, more inclusive, more responsive learning experiences for different audiences of learners. And so I was thinking, as I was preparing this presentation, and I identified three pillars that I think really summarize or encapsulate the type of work that we do across domains. The first one is the work, of course, of designing. And I would like you to think about design when we talk about learning experiences in a more expansive ways. In a more expansive way, sorry. So I am thinking about I am talking about assessing the needs in terms of learning in the environment where you are doing the work. We develop roadmaps. So after you have the outcomes that are going to guide your learning experience, what are the pathways of what are the ways in which we can get to that end goal? How are we going to get there? We also work choosing the different frameworks or approaches that are going to better or best serve the outcomes that we want to achieve with in the learning experiences that we're designing. And as I was saying before, we really do a lot of work on defining the scope of what is it that a specific learning experience needs to respond to, and that implies understanding the context. If we are to design something that really responds to the needs of the audience of learners we are collaborating with and for, we really need to understand what is their positionality, what is the context within which they are situated, and that is all part of the design work. We also do development work. And so after you know what is it that needs to be designed and where is it that you need to go, or the learners what they need to achieve or accomplish, then it's time to build and test prototypes, be e-learning or curriculum development or design. It doesn't matter the context, there's always going to be a big development component as an instructional designer. We work with accessibility standards, we develop assessments in different contexts, and of course, there is a big component of the graphic area of it, because the way you present materials and content and different elements of learning does make a difference. And finally, I would say the third pillar is going to be assessment, in the big meaning of the word. So we really have to do a lot of work in gathering, analyzing, and really tuning into the data to understand how things are progressing and how is the work that we are doing being received by the audiences of learners that we're hoping to impact. There is a lot of feedback cycles in what we do. So it's not only designing something and deploying it and just putting it out there, but we really need to get familiar and great at that process of, okay, what is the feedback that we are obtaining and how do we use that feedback to inform future iterations of whatever learning experience we are creating or that we are testing. And so that involves, of course, creating evaluation processes and identifying more and more areas of opportunity to make the learning experience better and better every time. So, there are many fields or areas or contexts where an ID can do that type of work that I've been describing until now. And just to give you a few examples, that can be corporations or organizations, healthcare, higher education, K-12, government and nonprofit organizations, and of course, freelance and consulting. If you remember at the beginning, I was saying that the instructional design field is so varied, and that's why I was calling it a landscape. Um, my experience has been mostly in higher ed, and that is what I will be zooming into as we progress through the session today. So I just wanted to reiterate that. Okay. So, for the next part of the session, I would like to talk about what are some of the competencies, knowledge, and skills that you would need as an instructional designer. And it really, really depends on what is it that you're doing. Because it is such a varied field, what you need to know and the areas in which you would need more refined knowledge are really going to depend on the industry where you're working. So, working in higher education might look very different than doing instructional design work, for example, in an educational technology company. Um, or in healthcare. So the technical aspects and the areas of knowledge are going to vary. Um, but I'd like to present it this way from a broad perspective. So I would say there are three main domains that an instructional designer really needs to master in their practice and their education and their progress. The first one is learning theory. So we don't only know about the technical portion of it. So just to give you an example, like, oh, what are the technical elements or the technology tools that you would need to perhaps develop an e-learning model or a program? We also need to be very well versed in the foundations of human learning. So how do people learn? How does the human brain work? Andragogy, adult learning, and pedagogy principles. What are some of the main assessment models that can help me really tune or ground this learning experience so that it can be effective? Motivation and emotion principles. What are some of the instructional models that maybe I can bring in to really make this a robust learning experience? And of course, critical and culturally responsive frameworks that can really allow you to deliver something that is relevant for the audience that you are serving. So that would be a first domain of knowledge. I would then say that a second one is instructional design models and frameworks. So you may be familiar with some of this. So universal design for learning is a big one. So how do we design and deliver and assess learning experiences or materials that really serve a variety of learners? ADI, so analysis, design, development, implementation, and evaluation is another big framework. Learning taxonomies. You may be familiar already with Bloom's taxonomy, but there are many others that can be also implemented and developed. And so there are many different frameworks that you get to build knowledge around, and that they are really going to contribute to a robust practice of instructional design. And then a third area of knowledge are the more targeted skills. And here I would include data collection and analysis, your knowledge about authoring tools. This is the term that we use for more like tech tools that you will use to develop, for example, e-learning content, learning materials that can be uploaded to a learning management system. So some of the main ones in the industry are Adobe Captivate, Articulate 360, Camtasia, iSpring, and there are more and more popping up every day. Of course, now generative AI tools and how salient these are is really going to depend, again, on the field where you are doing your work, but it's something that we cannot escape right now. So you really need to be able to be in the conversation right now of what is the impact of AI tools, how do we work around it, how do we integrate it. You need to really develop your knowledge around that. There are elements of graphic design, project management, learning management systems like Canvas, Blackboard, um, and of course, effective communication skills, because as I was saying before, there is a huge element of collaboration in instructional design work. The kind of like bigger terms that you see at the top and at the bottom that go across all the areas of knowledge are things that I think are fundamental for your practice, your ID practice. Doesn't matter the context in which you are doing the work. So, systems thinking. So, being able to understand how an individual learner, how a learning experience that you are developing, an institution, how are they positioned within larger systems, societal systems, the collaboration skills. And at the bottom, I would like to call your attention to this part of the graphic. So I would say that every instructional designer needs a growing awareness of what type of designer are you and what type of designer do you strive to become. Because the field is so varied, and there are so many directions in which you can go, I would encourage you, if you are thinking about starting a career in this field or you are transitioning from teaching or any other field, really dedicate some intentional time to reflect on, so who am I trying to be as an instructional designer? What are my values as an instructional designer? What is the type of work that I want to do? Because having clarity around that is really going to guide many of your decisions. So, where do you put your efforts in terms of professional development? What might be the best program for you depending on what emphasis they have? Where do you invest your time in terms of developing more of your skills or your technical abilities? So all of that is really going to depend on having a clear direction in terms of what type of designer you want to become. Okay. Lori, how are we doing on time?
Um, Doing well. We are 24 minutes into the hour.
Okay, perfect. I'll keep going then, and hopefully it will be brief from here. But I wanted to start narrowing down to what instructional design can look in higher education. As I was saying before, this is really the lens that I bring to the session because this has been most of my experience. There are many things. And even within the higher education context, ID work can look very different from one institution to another. Some examples of what can you do in this area is, for example, developing and implementing professional development opportunities. We do a lot of educational development that might look like one-on-one consultations with faculty, but also supporting administrators and classified professionals in the institution. We also support grant development and implementation, depending on what the grants are aiming for. We work a lot in curriculum development and review, supporting institutional accreditation processes for specific purposes, um, assessing and integrating educational technology tools, project management. We also support and lead different research projects depending on the skill set that you're bringing as an instructional designer. And we also teach. In my case, I work full time as an instructional designer at College of San Mateo, but I also teach psychology at Skyline College. So, depending on your area of expertise, there are so many avenues for you to do this type of work and personalize it really to your interests and values and goals. I wanted to give you a few specific examples of what my work looks like as an instructional designer who works not only in higher education, but also in a California community college. And I want to clarify that this role can be kind of particular because my ideal role here where I work is a tenure track faculty classification. So that's not always the case, but it is for me. And so I wanted to give you a few examples of what that might look like. One of the big projects that we have been working on is developing a series of micro courses that are fully online, asynchronous for faculty development. As we all know, faculty, teachers, educators in general have very limited time for professional development because of the workload. So the distance education team, which I am a part of, we were really trying to find a workaround for this and a way to offer professional development options for people who are so busy and who have limited time to engage in PD. And so for the past 2 years, we have been expanding this project of individual micro courses between 1 and 2 hours, again, completely online, asynchronous, that faculty can complete on their own time um, on areas of different areas of interest. This is a snapshot of my Calendly scheduling page. So I also offer dedicated support for different purposes and in multiple formats. So I offer one-on-one consultations, deep dive consultations, and also in areas that are more of my expertise or my area of interest. So for example, I offer consultations on equitable grading, brainstorming for people who want to explore other ways to assess learning in their courses, redesign sessions for syllabi, and I also do a lot of work around regular and substantive interaction and different grants that come up where I am a collaborator. Um, I have also been leading for the past 2 years an initiative called the Equitable Grading Lab, which is a summer institute followed by a community of practice where faculty across disciplines come together to reimagine one or more aspects of their grading models. And these have been one of the more enjoyable aspects of my work so far because I get to work really in depth with people and helping them brainstorm and progress towards something that they want to revise in their courses and the way they assess learning. I also collaborate a lot with initiatives around open educational resources and zero textbook costs. The district, the institution where I work, College of San Mateo, we have a few grants from the state's chancellor office on OER and ZTC. And so, as an instructional designer, I support specific programs and faculty who are trying to convert their courses to OER and ZTC. So, this is also a really big area of work for us. I'm going to close the presentation with some considerations around educational pathways if you are considering transitioning from another career or area of work, or if you are looking to get started in your pathway towards becoming an ID. Um, I've been saying it depends a lot, but it really depends. It depends on what your long-term career goals are and where do you want to go with your instructional design practice. But there are mainly two main entry points into the career of instructional design. So it generally requires a bachelor's degree, and after that, either a master's degree or a certificate, a graduate certificate. So I've prepared this table, and you will have access to the slides where you can click the links. I've tried to make like a collection of programs in the Bay Area that you can check out. But just to give you a few points of comparison, a master's degree will provide more specialized training in terms of theoretical foundations, models, frameworks, approaches, all of that juicy stuff that I was talking about in the beginning. Um, and you will generally have more time for portfolio development because you will be in the program for longer and you will be more opportunities to get exposed to different areas of practice. Of course, the completion times are longer in a master's degree. It requires higher financial investment, so there's that to consider as well. And just so you know, currently many higher ed positions, instructional design positions in higher ed, will require a master's degree as a minimum qualification for hiring. But there is also the option of certificates or graduate certificates, they are called sometimes too, which provide shorter and maybe more targeted training related to instructional design or e-learning as well. So there is less exploration of the theoretical foundations, and they tend to be more focused on practical skills that will prepare you to get ready for the job, right? They are less expansive in terms of like the scope of the aspect that they cover about the field, but they they are lower financial investments. So that's a huge advantage to certificates. Um, and another advantage is that these certificates are usually stackable. So usually you can begin to explore the field, dip your toe, and if you're not fully ready to commit to a master's degree, you can start accumulating certificates, and those usually will count for units that can be transferred to master's degrees later on if you decide to go that route. Um, Again, you will have access to the slides and you can make your own comparisons and click around to learn more about the different programs and options. Thank you. That is all I have for you today. You will also find my email address on the first slide of the presentation if you have questions or want to discuss further about what I have covered today. And you will also find a link to my faculty ID portfolio if you're curious and want to look around. But I'm going to stop my share and ask if we have any questions from the audience.
Thank you so much, Julie. We do
Yeah.
have some questions from the audience. First question is, okay, in the instructional design profession, how is AI affecting the market demand for instructional designer right now? I'm seeing in the corporate world the demand shrinking, the demand
Mm.
shrinking, or ID being collapsed into part of other roles. Given generative AI, it's being used more and more for designing and creating learning content.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Thank you for that. Again, I think it depends. I'm going to answer perhaps from my perspective in higher education. And I think it depends on the type of instructional design role, right? I definitely think that, as in many other professions right now, generative AI is offering more solutions for tasks that I would say, for example, graphic design, getting ideas for structuring an e-learning module, thinking about different frameworks, right? So I would say that it's not even a matter of replacing, even for us as instructional designers, being able to lean into how to better use those tools to really leverage our work and use them to expand what we can do. Because, for example, in one-on-one consultations with faculty, um, perhaps before in previous years, it might have taken me a week to come up with a graphic piece for a specific course, let's say. Now it doesn't take me that long because I am able to use some of those AI tools that we have been learning to really reduce the waiting times. And so I would say that there are many ways in which we can use them to our advantage. The other part of the conversation is that there are, learning is so broad and so expansive. And so, really designing a learning experience that is responsive to varied needs takes much more than individual tasks that perhaps you might be able to complete with AI. So, that part of critical thinking and really thinking about, okay, what is the context and what do I know about my learning audience and what does this specific faculty member need? And that back and forth that usually happens to design something that is effective and meaningful, that has a lot of value. And that's a lot of what we do on a day-to-day basis. Um, and I think in that sense, we're still very needed. So I also think that it goes back to the question of what type of designer do you want to be? So, um, perhaps it's not only it's time that we think not only about like, oh, it's only about developing e-learning modules or a specific learning material for a program or a training. It is much more than that, and thinking more expansive about it, I think there's still a lot of value that we bring to the table. But thank you for the question.
Thank you, Julie.
Yeah.
Second question. If I have an undergrad degree in a different field, will a master's program be complete enough to qualify for a job in education, in instructional design?
Yeah, excellent question. Short answer is yes. In fact, my background is not in instructional design per se. I am an educational psychologist, and I completed a certificate while I was doing my doctoral program. That so that certificate was in instructional design, and eventually I was able to apply for equivalency to show there are other ways in which you can show that you know what's needed to do this type of job. And I actually have many colleagues who have transferred, for example, from nursing education or teaching in K-12. Some people have STEM degrees. And then if you're able to transition towards advanced degrees, then that's actually a really great combination because you have more disciplined, focused expertise that other people may not have. And that brings a lot of value to the table. So, yes.
Thank you, Julie. Another question. I have a master's in education, and I'm looking to transition away from K to 12 and into ID. Would my education be enough for this career change, or do you recommend further schooling? And if so, do you think a certificate would suffice considering I already have a master in education?
Yeah, I would probably recommend looking into certificates. Instead of going immediately for another master's degree or even a doctoral program, perhaps you do some research because also within the certificate realm, there are many directions in which you can go. So some of them are going to focus more on the e-learning or online learning portion. Some of them are more geared towards the learning foundations of the ID work. So I would definitely recommend a certificate. And there are many, not only entry level roles that you can start doing, but because you already have teaching experience, I would say that you have an advantage already. Because you have a lot of the learning foundations. And so, really look for the certificate that you think is going to complement your practice so that you can have the credentials and start getting that experience.
Thank you, Julie. Similar question. I think you covered this a little bit. Okay. Are there master's degrees in the Bay Area or online that someone could complete while also working full time?
Yeah, for sure. In fact, if you look at the links whenever Lori shares the presentation, and if you do additional research, many of the certificate, for example, programs, and even many of the master's degree programs will offer hybrid and fully online options for working professionals. So it is definitely doable. I think Jesse Franco makes also a great point. Checking out the Association for Talent Development for ID workshops. Workshops and individual sessions, LinkedIn Learning, and also Coursera can also be great options to look into stackable credentials that you can begin accumulating for your ID path.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you for your presentation. Do you have suggestion about free platforms or open source tools to create portfolio? And what kinds of project do you think we should include?
I think my answer is going to be sort of limited in this specific question because I have worked mostly in higher ed. So my portfolio experience has been building a faculty portfolio, which may look completely different than the portfolio that you would need for ID work in ed tech or like corporate fields, right? So it's going to look very different. Google Sites is always a good option. WordPress, but again, you might want to look into additional insight for that. In terms of projects, it depends on what you want to showcase. I think that perhaps a good exercise is writing down what are the top 3 to 4 skills that you really want to highlight to a potential employer, depending on the type of job that you are doing or hoping to do. And then what are the projects in your toolkit that really showcase those top 3 or 4 skills that you have in your list. Um, and so that would be my recommendation. But perhaps you might want to get additional insights for portfolio development because it's not an area that I work in very often.
Thank you, Julie.
Yeah.
Is there an age limit for someone who wants to transition into instructional design?
I love this question, and I will tell you that I think this is probably one of the most inclusive fields where I have worked. I have worked with colleagues of all ages, really, and all backgrounds. So this is one of the things that I love about the ID work. So you will have people who have served as educators or teachers for 20 years and then decided to make a change and now they're here. And that's, I think, one of the things that makes our field so strong that you get that variety of people. So I don't think age is a restriction. I think if you are at a point in your career where you're like, I am ready for something else, I would say take the leap because I think there are great things waiting at the other side and plenty of opportunity.
Thank you, Julie. As an ID, how would you go about creating instructional content in an area where your own personal core expertise is limited? That is where you are highly dependent upon collaboration with subject matter experts.
Exactly. And I think you answered the question by yourself, Ben. Collaboration is always going to be at the center of what we do. And it's going to be very rare that an instructional designer is going to be working on their own. Not even if you are designing materials or a product or a learning experience in your area of expertise. You will most likely have to collaborate with other instructional designers. Instructional technologists, if that role exists at your institution. But usually you will have subject matter experts. I'll give you an example. I am a psychologist, an educational psychologist, and I work as an instructional designer. But here at College of San Mateo, I support specific divisions, which are language arts, business and technology, and kinesiology, athletics, and dance. Those are not my areas of expertise. And so it is really a collaboration of the instructor. They bring the expertise and the deep, robust knowledge in their field, in their area, and I bring the knowledge of how people learn and how do we design responsive, inclusive, strong learning in different contexts. So that collaboration is key. So yeah, because there's no way that you can be an expert in the so many fields that you're going to be working in as an ID.
Thank you, Julie.
Yeah. And if I can add something to that,
Yes, yes.
that's actually one of the coolest part of the job. You get to learn so much about so many fields that you would otherwise not even be around or have an opportunity to look into. So I think that's just a fascinating part of the job.
Thank you. The challenge is keeping your technical knowledge and skill relevant and updated by having the authoring tools software.
Yeah.
This is very expensive. How do you work around this? I think you may have answered previously. It's open source apps readily available to work around this. The licensing fee is very, very expensive if you're trying to work independently. Thank you. Excellent presentation and resources, by the way.
Oh, thank you, Amy. Um, I totally agree with you. And I think it's perhaps one of the main challenges that we face in the instructional design field. A lot of the times, if you're working for an institution or an organization, you might get lucky that they provide those authoring tools for you. But if you're doing freelance work, that is one of the main hurdles, and I don't know that I have an answer for that. Maybe someone else in the audience who is doing freelance work, or maybe if you can email me, I can probably like find out more from colleagues who work freelancing and consulting, how they work around that. But I don't have an answer as of now. It's a major challenge.
Thank you, Julie. What is the typical starting salary range for ID in San Francisco, both at the higher education level and corporate?
That's an excellent question. Um, I will say right off the bat that I do work in corporate settings, tends to be higher than in higher education environments. That's just how it is. The starting salary, at least in higher education, a lot of the times it's going to depend on your certifications and the type of degrees that you are bringing to the table, and it's going to depend on if the role is classified as a faculty role, or classified employee, or another classification. But it can be in the 80,000 range for an ID who is a faculty member.
Thank you, Julie. What AI tools have you found most useful for creating education content, for example, quizzes or illustration and or presenting material for the learner?
Let's see. So, on top of mind right now, because we are doing a lot of work with this at the moment. So, I'm working heavily this semester in open educational resources for film, and we are using Notebook LM as a way to create collections of flashcards, deep dive podcasts as ancillary materials open for OER film courses. So that is one that we have been using a lot. Canva, the AI features for Canva, we have been also using a lot with the Pro version. Adobe Firefly is doing very interesting things in terms of image generation as well. So those three would be at the top of my mind for now.
Thank you. Um, this has been an incredible presentation. I have so many questions and ideas. I'd love to hear where you would begin if you were starting all over again and wanted to become an an ID specializing in in-person educational experience for K to 12.
Sorry, you were breaking.
Oh, this has been an incredible presentation. I have so many questions and ideas. I'd love to hear where you would begin if you were starting all over again and wanted to become an instructional designer specializing in in-person educational experience for K through 12.
Let's see, where would I begin? This is such an interesting question. I would probably start trying to establish that foundation for learning principles. And so I don't know if that might look to you like a certificate or perhaps another graduate degree that would allow you to get some of those foundations in there. I will say that if it were me, now I would just go straight for an advanced degree in instructional design because by the way that I stumbled upon instructional design work in my graduate degree, it was already kind of late for me to switch to something else, but I would probably start just pursuing a master's degree or a certificate right away in instructional design. And then after that, or while you're doing that, probably focusing on building up your experience and skills with authoring tools. I think it's James who was giving a lot of good insights on that because they will be useful not only in the corporate environment, but also in K-12 and higher education. The challenge, and we were talking about this before, is that we don't always have access, unfortunately, to the funding that is required for these licenses. But it is always good to be developing those skills for when the opportunity presents, you know how to use them. So I would probably go there.
Thank you, Julie. What can your subject matters expert Uh, what can your subject matter expert collaborators bring to the table, which is most helpful to the instructional design exercise?
That type of work can be interesting, and I will refer specifically to like one-on-one consultations because I feel like that's the closest example that might be relevant for this question. A lot of the times, the instructional design work can be misunderstood. And so you often will get instructors or subject matter experts who will come to you and not really know how they can collaborate with you. So, helping people define the scope of the work is going to be a big one. And I would say we have to dedicate a lot of time to that, like defining what is relevant and what isn't to a particular project or a collaborative work. Um, and also, how are they providing the content that you need to do your ID work, right? Sometimes you run into situations where people will just give you a bunch of content in a format that doesn't really work for you or serves you well for the type of work that you're doing. So you really have to help them identify, okay, this is how I need it for me to be able to grab what I think and do what I need to do. And how do we narrow this down and really try to select what's going to be relevant for this project that we are trying to complete and what is just not for this project and what might be for a different type of effort. So that kind of like scope and focusing on the goals and kind of packaging the content in a way that can serve you for your work is a big one.
What does ID look like to someone with a master's in learning disabilities, experience in higher ed, and a passion for digital accessibility?
Yeah, in fact, so accessibility is an area of work that's going to be relevant for all domains of instructional design work. And I would even say, regardless of the context where you're doing the work. I, in fact, have a colleague who that is her area of expertise, and she works as an instructional designer in our district. And so, because we collaborate in so many projects, each of us has like a different area of focus. And so her area, because she brings a lot of accessibility experience, she will often do accessibility reviews for the courses. Or whenever we are developing a new learning material or a new program, for example, in the micro courses, before we launch, we will send it to her so that she can conduct a thorough accessibility check and tell us where are the areas that need to be improved and how we can make it more accessible and inclusive for and responsive for everyone. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that would be my answer for now. Like she has a very defined scope, and it's not only one thing, but she will work like across projects wherever that accessibility expertise is needed, which is really almost every project, I'll have to say.
Thank you, Julie. That's
Yeah.
the last question.
Okay,
I see
thank
that
you for all that.
some participants suggested some resources.
Yes,
Others can look at it in the Q&A.
great.
All the suggestions that the participants um, uh, brought up. We are 6 minutes away from 3 o'clock. If you guys have questions, you can put it in the Q&A. Um, while we wait for more questions from the audience, I have a question for you, Julie.
Yeah.
Um, what do you think is the more common challenges um, instructor face? How do you help address their challenges?
Instructors are subject matter experts, first of all, of course, and they have a lot of knowledge about pedagogy and learning in general. So we have to acknowledge that. And, just to reframe the question a little bit too, I think that's also an aspect of awareness for us as instructional designers in education in general. To acknowledge what people already bring to the table. I think there are so many expectations for instructors and educators in general. They are overworked. They have a lot of things to do. They have a lot of expectations on their shoulders, so very little time. And I think sometimes as thought partners, we can help them figure out what they are already doing because sometimes they're very nervous about meeting standards for certain things and they don't realize that they're already doing a lot of the things that they are supposed to be doing. They're just not calling it that or naming it in the way that we would name it. Um, and so, I think I would start there. Another challenge is that sometimes there is a lot of emphasis in content, right? Because they are expected to cover so much across the curriculum, sometimes there can be a tendency to say, well, but I cannot sacrifice content, right? I have to cover these things. And in the collaboration with an ID, there needs to be space for the conversation. Well, there is content, but there is also the way in which we structure this learning experience, how we present the content to students, the materials that we bring into. So helping them broaden their scope as to what effective learning entails beyond content, I would say.
Thank you, Juliet.
Yeah.
Assuming the role of ID based on the work you've been able to produce that stakeholders have noticed and brought you on. How do you help others in a company take you serious in your new position?
Um, I think this goes with time and consistency. And I just want to be clear that I'm answering this question as a younger woman of color who's also an immigrant and who also brings an accent to the table. And we have to be, mindful of that as well as our positionalities when we come into these roles as instructional designers. When I first got to the district, many people didn't really know what an instructional designer was. So really dedicating time to first learning what people think an ID is. Um, Dedicating time to not only explain what is it that you do, but also demonstrating how you can contribute value to the things that are already happening within the organization and how you can help make it better. Um, One of the things that I always like to emphasize is that yes, we can propose many new things that we can bring to a corporation or to a higher ed institution or a K-12 institution, but I think the real magic happens when you're able to demonstrate that you can contribute to the systems that already exist, what they have in place, and how you can start transforming that from the inside. Because there are funding considerations, investment, resources, personnel, all that. So when you're able to say, okay, this is what you have, and this is how I can help you improve what you have to increase value or like to really take it to the next level, I think if you choose that as your entry point, it's going to take you a long way.
Thank you, Julie. It's 1 minute away from three. We have a
Mm.
few more questions. Do you mind just answer the next two questions?
Yeah, and I'm happy to also, if you want to email me these questions, like I
Okay,
can also reply that way
okay,
because I know
okay,
we're
sure.
getting short on time.
Yes,
Let me
I'll
see.
just read the next two questions. Where do
hmm
you see the overlap between instruction design and user experience design? And what are the three or so key skills that UX pros should learn if they want to incorporate ID in their skill set or migrate to ID outright? Thanks so much.
I'm going to answer this question not being an expert or pretending to know fully what an user experience designer does, because I don't want to imply that. Um, but I would imagine that you already have a lot of technical skill, right? If that is your line of work, I would probably say look for that complement for learning theory foundation and start researching what are some of the frameworks that are mostly used in instructional design work to really pair that with your technical skills. You also bring a lot of knowledge, I imagine, already about data collection and user experience. And so that's going to transfer really beautifully in how you work with people, how you are able to gauge what they need, and what are some of the ways in which a learning experience can respond to that. So there is a lot of overlap in that. I think perhaps the learning science foundation in theory is something you might want to look into, but there are a lot of skills that are going to transfer right away.
Thank you. One last question. As a graphic designer, would the transition into ID seem logical? It seems like having an education background makes a stronger ID.
Yeah, I think your assessment is accurate. Yes to the educational background because you are ultimately designing for effective learning, right? And so graphic design is an aspect of it because you are probably going to be producing a lot of learning materials, presentations, items, all sort of things. But that is part of a broader understanding of what a learning experience and learning design entails. So I think that's probably going to be your next step. Like, what does the learning side of the house look like to really complement your graphic design skills? But it is a powerful combo, I will say. You'd be surprised. Like, as an instructional designer, the better graphic design, the more graphic design skills you're able to build, those will also take you a long way. So if you already have that, it's looking at the other side of it, the learning and pedagogy part of it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Julie, for sharing your experience and valuable insights into the world of instructional design in higher ed with us today. We truly appreciate your time and valuable perspectives. And to everyone in the audience, thank you for attending and for your thoughtful and engaging questions. Your participation really, really added to the value of this session. We wish you all the best as you explore new opportunities and grow in your own learning journeys. We'll be sending out a quick survey along with today's presentation recording. Your feedback really matters to us, so we'd love it that if you could take a minute to share your thoughts and help us make future session even better. Thanks again, everyone, and wishing you all a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you
Bye
so much
now.
for your time.
Thank
Bye bye.
you. Bye bye.